when I was in seventh grade is when I got my own turntable for the first time. And the first record that I played on my turntable, the first song was Ties That Bind. The first album was The River.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson, and joining me today, we will be on the Bruce train, but we'll also be going off a little bit because today I have a writer, producer, father, husband, podcast host, and someone who has been involved creatively in music really his whole life. Brian Koppelman, welcome to Set Listing Bruce.
Hey man, I'm so happy to be here, and I really appreciated how intensely you expressed your desire to have this conversation. And so, I'm convalescing with COVID right now, and so I have to isolate away from my wife. And I was like, I could do this today because I could give Jesse the time, because otherwise, I'd just be sitting here, maybe doing something productive for myself. And I'm really thrilled, and I love talking about Bruce. It's I was actually all morning just sitting around playing Bruce songs on my guitar, so it's a perfect thing.
Well, that is great. You had mentioned, and I will ask you the Mary question again, but you were very kind enough that when you were on your podcast, you asked for questions, and I'd sent that in, and you answered and gave one of the best answers ever. So I'm gonna tease
what was my answer
my
then?
audience.
What was my
Well, I'm not
going
to spoil it because maybe just because I don't want to taint you. You have a great answer. So you can think about that while we're talking. We always like to start at the beginning. Brian, talk to me growing up. What kind of music?
I'm sure my answer ties into Tom Joad. Yeah, that's what I really believe, because that is what I believe.
Oh, very nice.
I'm happy to answer that later. Yeah.
Growing up, what kind of music?
Well, I grew up in a household that was really an intense music household. My father, my dad's 82, and still doing great. He was a record producer and a music publisher. And so I grew up, music was really a part of our lives. Songwriters is what he loved and what I loved too. By middle school, I was a heavy metal fan mostly, because it was the only way that music could be some sort of a rebellion or my own thing in my house, because my dad made pop and rock music. But I will tell you that when I was in seventh grade is when I got my own turntable for the first time. And the first record that I played on my turntable, the first song was Ties That Bind. The first album was The River. And because it was the newest Bruce album, I was born in 1966. So I was 13 in 79, and in 80s when I got this 80s when I got this turntable. And I remember taking The River out, getting that record and playing it. I would wake up in the morning and I would put it on and then get back in bed and listen to that a lot of mornings before getting up to go to school.
Wow. Were you able to go to the River tour when he redid this, just a few years ago? Were you busy making creative stuff, or did you get to go see him live in any of those shows where he did The River in full?
I mean, I've seen Bruce live certainly more than 10 times.
Yeah.
But not in the last 15 years, I don't think.
Oh, interesting.
I spent so much of my life going to concerts. I miss them so much now. But, the last 6 years, 7 years, I've really been grinding on work. And my wife and I had a very deep connection to Bruce and his music. She's someone from Jersey. She would leave messages in his mailbox in Rumson when she was growing up. And the two of us would go to shows together. And I'll say that there was something about, we got married in 1992 and we went to that whole run of shows together with Shane Fontaine, and something about that made me not want to go see Bruce for a while. I love Bruce. He's one of my all-time favorite artists. I mean, I've gotten to know, I've had a dinner with him once, and I speak to Mr. Landau from time to time, and I know every word to every Bruce song. But I hated that band, and it more than that, I felt like it broke some sort of a deal with us, and it hurt, and it probably just took me a minute to get back into being ready to go. Like, I don't actually think I've seen Bruce with the reconstituted E Street Band. I must have once, though I don't remember. But I used to go see Bruce in the E Street Band, I mean, all the time, from my senior year in high school, which was 84, until 92. That's when I must have seen 12 shows.
I think that's interesting. I've had a couple of people on the show and I talk about the dark years, right? Like, because I was a casual fan. I grew up in Louisiana. My dad was in the Army. We moved around a lot. I didn't move to Dallas till 84. So there's no way Bruce was coming to Lake Charles, Louisiana. Just life got in the way. And I did not see my first show till 2002.
Right.
So he was in my life, but not the way it is now. So that whole firing the E Street Band and then reunion didn't affect me, but I've had so many people talk about that dark period.
Well, those albums, listen, Lucky Town's a great album.
Yes,
and there are great songs on Human Touch. And I've watched all the documentaries over and over again. And there's something about Danny being dead and Clarence. It's a lot. Like, I invested so much in the bands that I care about.
Yeah.
And there's no band you care about more in certain ways than the E Street Band. And I saw Bruce. I saw the Broadway show, but that wasn't with the E Street Band. So Amy and I went, and we cried the whole time. The two of us were just crying the whole time in person on Broadway, and it was incredible. And so that to me counts as seeing Bruce, but it's not seeing Bruce with the E Street Band.
Yes.
So it's a slightly different thing. Yeah, man. It started, like, I'll say, even on the Tunnel of Love tour, when instead of saying I'm a prisoner of rock and roll, Bruce started saying I'm a prisoner of that love thing.
Yeah.
That for me was not, I was young, right? Bruce is 15 years older than I am. So he was at a different place in his life. But I remember feeling, well, that's not why I'm coming here.
Yes.
I'm coming here to celebrate the sacrament that rock and roll is, this other kind of love. And when he started saying I'm a prisoner of this love thing, I remember a sinking feeling in my stomach, which was, he's on an artistic journey. I respect that, but it's not exactly the thing for which I signed up. Now, I've grown up and my opinion has shifted, and there's no Bruce album, I don't think, Bruce never made a bad album. He's never even made an album that's like less than great.
Yeah.
I listen to all those records. I probably listen to Human Touch less than any of the others. I listen to Lucky Town, though. I mean, Lucky Town has just great songs on it.
Better Days is my favorite song.
Yeah. I mean, Better Days is spectacular, and Lucky Town's spectacular, And which one is One Step Up on?
I think you're right. Lucky Town. Yeah, I think so.
That's another great song.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the live experience for me, I will go, like, if they ever tour again, I mean, I'm so hungry for it.
Oh.
And I've gotten to know Stevie, and I like Stevie a great deal, and we're friendly with each other. And so the idea of going now and seeing little Steven play with them, and I'm ready to go do that and kind of like lose it in the audience.
I have to jump ahead. I think that interview you had with little Steven on your podcast was one of the best interviews I've ever heard. because he was so real. And since then he's done his autobiography and he's talked about this a lot, but that was the first time I remember him sharing the road not taken.
Oh
Like,
yeah, man. When he started talking about being on that airplane, and
yeah,
it's in the autobiography, it's incredible in the memoir.
yeah.
But he told it beautifully on the podcast. I agree. He's going to come on. I think in 2 weeks we're going to go do another pod together,
Oh,
and
good.
because I love the memoir. It's just
Oh, me
spectacular,
too.
and the life he's lived and the choices he's made as an artist are, I admire the hell out of them, and he's willing to talk about the disappointments along the way. I mean, another thing he said on my podcast was the thing about, Bruce plays to 100,000 in the same place I'll play to 1,000. Is it really 100 times better than me? And I've thought about that question a lot. He mentions it in the autobiography too, and I plan to talk to him about that actually.
Yeah, because I know for me, if a member of the E Street Band is coming to Dallas, Texas, I'm going. In fact, I'm a little sad that Jake has never come far this south, but I attended Little Steven. I've done Neil's shows when they're here, because the sum is greater than the parts, but it's still, I want to see their music. I appreciate them.
Yeah, me too. I completely get that. Though it's not the same thing as because the myth. I mean,
yes,
what I'll talk to Little Steven about, and what I think he's so aware of the myth, but it's what is created by Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band and that audience together that's 100 times greater. That's its own thing that's not replicable without all those elements there. And that's why it was missing in the band with Shane Fontaine. Not to target Shane, but I just remember, he's who replaced Nils and Steven, and it was just like, this makes no sense to me.
The other thing I was thinking about, right, is that that as we're recording this, just recently on Twitter, Ted Nugent kind of said a bad thing about Bruce, but at the same time was complimenting the E Street Band, and I was like, even when you are trying to be discouraging, you can't diminish that band. And I believe that it isn't that you have a mediocre songwriter surrounded by a major band. It is they all are amazing artists. And as Bruce talked about on the Showtime, 1 + 1 = 3. Combined, they are better than themselves individually.
That's true. And also, Bruce is one of the greatest songwriters who ever lived, and storytellers and performers and band leaders, and I saw Ted Nugent when I was 14, and I walked out 2 songs in. At 14, 15 years old at the Nassau Coliseum, I looked at my 2 buddies, and going to a concert was such a big deal. I mean, you had to save, and you also had to really arrange a lot of stuff to go. Your parents had to drive you. You didn't have a cell phone to call, and it hurt our ears, and we were just like, this sucks, and we left. So fuck Ted Nugent, man.
Very nice. I did want to go back to watching him on Broadway. Your perception as a fan and as a very gifted storyteller in yourself, can you separate the two and kind of explain to me the little difference of that, or was it just pure fandom for you watching?
I mean, you're just swept up in the story. I'd read Bruce's book before.
Yeah.
So I knew a bunch of the stories. I mean, I've read, and I'd also read books about Bruce and all that stuff. I'm a very big reader. No, man, the whole time I was just with my wife, and, as people for whom Bruce's music has meant so much, and trying to understand that he was laying himself bare for us there. He was separating the myth from the human being, while celebrating the myth. And he was showing us why the myth was so important, why the story is so important. And he was preparing us for his own death. And it was a very heavy, heavy, heavy night at a theater for us.
Yeah, I think Letter to You is a lot about that too, where he is discussing it at any age, but especially when you get over 50, or in my case, I'm 62, the road in front of you is shorter than the road behind you. That isn't being morbid, that is just stating the fact. And I think he's embraced that. And I believe that during that river tour, like in 2016, the band played so well together because I think they did realize, I don't know how many more times we're going to be able to do this, and we should enjoy this experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure, Letter to You is, I've watched that documentary 3 times,
Yeah,
and I just keep watching it for the little moments, man.
yeah,
The little looks between Steve and Gary, the little, watching Landau's expressions when he's in the room, and trying to understand how and why Bruce came to the decision to make an album about that stuff at this time.
yeah. There is a scene, and it's very clear. Little Steven has talked often about him being Silvio. Was it not a stretch for him because of his relationship with Bruce and being on The Sopranos? But there is a scene in that where I go, oh my gosh, that is so Silvio talking to Tony Soprano, that when he's talking about Bruce about, hey, why don't we try this? And what do we do that?
Well, yeah, and then he goes, oh, that's very important. It's very important.
Yes.
When Bruce is like, the riff only comes one time, and he goes,
Yeah.
it's very important, very good
Yeah.
to know. And he's telling everybody else kind of with the way he's looking at them. 100%. He's the consigliere, man.
Yeah, it is just amazing. Yeah. I'm going to turn first off. I'm loving Billions. I was there for the beginning. I'm excited about this new season. One of my favorite shows was Friday Night Lights, and they take the Dylan Panthers and make them the bad guy, in the 3rd season, and change this all around. You have taken an iconic lead. For other reasons, he's left, and now then you've kind of almost made it this a new show in this new season. That's got to be fun for you.
Yeah, it's incredible to get to work with this cast and my fellow writers, and to have an audience that cares so much about the world that we've created, and that exists first in our imaginations before it exists anywhere else.
Yeah.
I don't really think about it, and I bet you that the Friday Night Lights people didn't either. I don't really think about it in terms of like moves. I'm thinking about it in terms of these characters and what they would do.
Yeah.
And what matters to them, and what I'm interested in pursuing thematically and story-wise. And I've been at this a long time with my partner Dave, and so from the outside, I pay attention. I'm aware of what people think and the way that they react, but all that stuff's kind of turned off when I'm doing it. When I'm writing it, I'm just writing it, man. I'm just letting it go. I'm just trying to entertain Dave, and he's trying to entertain me.
There is nothing wrong with that. I love that idea. I will often, if you do a solo podcast, I do a couple of group podcasts, and I joke often, the whole point of the podcast is for me to make my co-host laugh. If I do that, it's a good episode, whether my audience liked it or not, right?
What are your other podcasts about?
So I do a Doctor Who podcast where we talk about that, and then I do and my guys are very jealous, I do a How Many podcast. It was just an excuse for my friends and I to get together. And what we do is we pick a pop culture topic, and then we say how many of them were good. Like, okay, here's Queen's top 50 songs. How many of them would you call good?
Oh, that's fun.
And we debate. And they're all big poker players. And when we originally had exchanged, they were like, oh my God, we could just do a whole episode on rounders because they're huge. Though I think personally, Tilt is my favorite story you've told about gambling. I'm a huge awesome. Lawrence Block fan.
I got no problem with Tilt, man. I mean, that's great to hear.
Lawrence Block is one of my favorite writers. I've I believe you've interviewed him. He's
I mean,
been,
he's my close friend. I love him. Yeah.
oh, there,
I love that man.
I know, Brian, I have to tell the story. I love the story so much because I think it talks so much about writing. He was a bookstore here in Dallas.
Yeah.
And recently the Matthew Scudder book, Elaine had told Matt, I love you no matter what is going on. And so I raised my hand and I said, do you think Elaine knows that Matt is cheating on her? And is that why he's telling her? And he goes, I think she knows. Or I think she knows that there's probably something, but she just wants to tell him that their love, he's where she needs to be. And I went, I love that. He's not saying yes or no. He's saying, I think the character knows, even though he's the writer of the show.
Well, he doesn't want to take it away from you, I think. And yeah, I've interviewed Larry on the podcast. He's a gigantic creative hero of mine. I first met him when I was in my late 20s, I think.
Yeah.
He's my dad's age. And I really, really cherish the time that I get to talk to him and spend with him. And he's one of my favorite human beings, and he's a genius. His Matt Scudder series, I agree with you. His Matt Scudder series required reading, I think. Those books are, they're the most human private eye books because this character ages. Matt Scudder is Lawrence Block's age. And so you go the whole way. I got to write the introduction to a collection of Matt Scudder stories, which is one of, for me, the great things I've ever gotten to do.
I love that. Yeah, I love Bernie the Burglar books and everything, but I gave myself the gift of 3 or 4 years ago of rereading all the books, just one in a row, and just was amazed at how a world he built. And such.
What's your favorite of the books?
That is hard to say. Now, if you ask me, my favorite series is Hitman. I think that
you like the Keller series.
I love the Keller. I just love the idea that you end up pulling for a killer, and the book where he ends up settling in New Orleans and creating a new life is just amazing to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Long Line of Dead Men, that's my favorite.
That's what I was just going to say the same thing. If I had to push it down, I think A Long Line of Dead Men is just such great storytelling and such humanity. Absolutely.
Yeah, such humanity. Yeah.
Yeah, just such good. Okay. Bruce, what do you have favorite albums? Do you have favorite, memories of shows that you want to share?
Sure, yes. For a long time, Nebraska was my favorite Bruce album. It was one of the 2 albums that got me through my sophomore year of college. I had a really bad sophomore year of college. And I had this Jeep CJ7 that the heat was busted, and it was Boston cold winter. And I would drive. I was at Tufts, and I had a buddy who was at BU, and we'd meet in the middle of Cambridge at this all-night coffee shop, hamburger place. And so many nights I would drive back freezing cold in this car, and the wind and the snow just whipping around. And I had 2 cassettes in the car, and they didn't even have their cases. And one was Fables of the Reconstruction by REM, and the other was Nebraska. And there were so many nights when I would take long ass road trips and just play Nebraska over and over again as I would drive, like from Boston to New York, or from Boston to visit a friend in Connecticut. And I still think it might be the masterpiece. It's even the way Steven writes about it in his book, I couldn't argue with that it's this complete and completely unified voice, and that Bruce gave so much humanity to these characters on the edges of society, and it was a way that Bruce could talk to really directly about his father in a way that was different than in a song like Factory. You know, it was just he was able to talk about the personal pain of a song like Used Cars and a song like uh, Mansion on the Hill. You know, he was able to really talk about that stuff while at the same time talking about the criminal justice system and talking about familial bonds and the ways in which they're stretched and pushed. And so that album remains crucial to me. And obviously, you know, when Bruce allowed us to use Atlantic City and Billions, it was an absolute highlight of my professional life. You know, it was so mind blowing to me that we got to do that. And that was before I'd met him. And we heard he was going to read the scene. At the time, we didn't know he liked the show. Then when I met him and I found that he was a big fan of the show, it was very hard for me to process and really a mind-boggling thing. And then lately, though, I have found myself listening to Darkness a lot, and then listening to live albums that have a heavy amount of songs from Darkness.
Yes.
You know, but I could go through a period, and I have, where The Rising is something I'm listening to all the time, and you know, Born to Run is one of the 10 greatest albums ever made. So
Right.
it switches around a lot. You know, the songs on Born in the USA are as good as any could be. Tunnel of Love is this mature record, and you know, even Magic is a great album, and Letter to, you know, the last record is fantastic.
Yeah.
You know, he's so consistent and so consistently great and so consistently reaching as high as he can and reaching as deep as he can, that it all remains so inspiring to me as an artist.
Well, like, I thought of you, like, so much of Billions, the early season or so was tied to 9/11, right? And I thought of that with the Rising, and how it is universal among us Springsteen fans, but especially about people who are living in that part of the world during that event. I think it speaks to all of us, but especially to that demographic.
Sure. I mean, look, the story of, you know, the person saying, "We need you, boss," to Bruce,
Yeah.
and Bruce realizing it is just so great. And look, the rise. You know, I was thinking about this because you and I are old enough to remember when Tattoo You came out, and like Start Me Up. A lot of people at the time were like, one song on the record's good, but it's not like now. 30 years later, everyone understands Start Me Up is one of the greatest Rolling Stones songs.
Right.
And The Rising is one of the greatest Bruce Springsteen songs.
Yeah.
And but at the time, you know, it's like, yes, this album's great and it's really important and all that stuff. But 20 years later, The Rising is one of the greatest Bruce Springsteen songs. And what an incredible thing to do that far along into your career.
Yeah. I always find this interesting, and partly this is because when my first show was 2002, so The Rising is the only song he's played every time I've seen him. I've seen him like 17 times, and that just, it works out because of the timeline. Just an amazing song that has been used in a lot of different ways. You were talking about his creativity, and I do not mean this as a criticism, because my other musical hero is Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. I just think him is amazing. Yeah. But his latest CD is Brian playing the piano. It is brilliant in a lot of ways. It's just him at a piano playing Beach Boy songs. You know, Bruce's latest album is a whole collection of songs, some of them, a couple that he brought back, but you know, he's pushing the envelope. He is working creatively, you know. And Brian, for whatever reasons, is doing something that I love as a consumer, but I would not say it's pushing any new creative boundaries. Not that he has to do that. So any thoughts on, you already mentioned a
Well,
little bit,
Bruce
but
has always, I mean, look, Bruce has always tried to, like I say, reach deep, we sort of ignored, or I didn't bring up Greetings and
yeah,
E Street. I mean, those are also like just
yeah,
albums I go back to all the time.
yeah,
That's the thing about Bruce's library
yeah,
at this point. It kind of has to offer whatever you need to access wherever you happen to be in living out your life. And
yes,
so over pandemic, I got much better at guitar. I'm still not good, but I, was playing growing up. The lick to Growing Up, and I was playing that a couple days ago, singing it and playing it around my house. And like, I was like, wow, man, what a fucking song that is.
yeah,
And that was, him as a kid. I'm glad he brought those two songs back for A Letter to You, by the way.
yeah,
I had those bootlegs. I mean, that's the thing, because I've been into this so long. Like, you came
right,
into Bruce in 2000. I was a fan from when I was,
yeah, exactly,
13. And I lived in New York, so I could take the train into the city and go to these bootleg record shops. And I mean, I had tons of Springsteen bootlegs, and so I had those John Hammond recordings. I mean,
hmm,
I heard If I Was a Priest, these early versions, and I will say it was a song I didn't really get when I was a kid, and now it's one of my very favorite Springsteen
yes,
songs. And I'm so glad that he gave it this new life now,
I do
even
too.
though in terms of its meter and flow, it's very different than the other songs on the album. I don't care. I'm so happy to
Yeah,
hear it, man.
I just love it, and I agree. It is so nice, and I can't wait that hopefully in 2023 we're going to get a tour, and hopefully they're going to do some of those. It's going to be great. Um, do do you? I am sure you have the same concerns we all do about disappointment that they're not touring, but understanding, right? Because I imagine you guys are fighting a constant battle trying to
Oh
when you
yeah,
were
I'm
filming
not.
Billions.
I have no sense of like. I don't want them to go out on the road until they can go out and be
Yeah,
healthy. And
exactly.
like, I'll go. It's 100% that I'm there when they're. Especially now that I'm vaxxed and boosted and I have COVID. So
Yeah, yeah,
I'm ready to go. I'm
yes,
ready to go.
yeah,
And I can't wait. I'll go to I'll go to multiple shows,
yeah,
and it'll be different now in a certain way for me,
yeah,
in that I've gotten to know Steve, and I know Mr.
yeah,
Landau, and so I've spent a little bit of time with Bruce, but I just cannot wait to be in Madison Square Garden. I just can't wait.
yeah. I'm right there with you. I want to talk a little bit of the podcast before and I don't want to take too much of your time.
Go
I
ahead.
love every time you have someone, but there is something, and maybe it's because of your roots in being involved in the music industry, your father, but like when you talk to Jason Isbell, when you talk to Roseanne Cash, I just found it incredibly insightful. Um, I, I have a man crush on Jason Isbell. I just think this guy is an amazing storyteller and seems to be a good dude. Roseanne Cash, she was on the Country and Western with Ken Burns, and I just went, I want to go to dinner with her and just have her tell me stories. So just kind of general talk about the podcast. Why did you decide to do it? And maybe give some highlights of what are some of your favorite discussions.
Oh, I love Jason. Jason, look, I think Jason's the best songwriter under 50 in the world, and I'll Bruce and Amy Mann and Bob Dylan, or those guys, they're all
Yeah.
over 50. So, and yes, Jason's a beautiful guy. I got to know him in 2013, and he did the podcast, I think, the year later, and then he did it when The Last Record came out. He and his wife Amanda are just awesome. She's a great, great artist
Yes.
in her own right. Well, I don't linger on these conversations after I've had them, because I'm thinking about what the next thing is, and I prepare so hard to do them.
Yeah.
So I don't really know. Like, I have this. the great thing about it, as you know, is it's an incredible sort of like relationship accelerator, because you spend an hour talking to someone, you get to know them. And so it's more like it's great that I come away with a different sense of that person, and they come away with a different sense of me. And then, hopefully our audience gets something transferred to them about the way that people make stuff. And yeah, I'm so incredibly taken with how hard it is to do what great songwriters do, that economy, and how brave they have to be to do what they do as artists. So yeah, I love talking to musicians. And this week I had Mellencamp on, and that was really incredible. And it was incredible hearing him talk about how Bruce is like his big brother.
Yeah,
and Sean meant a great deal to me my whole life, and to get to have him on. I mean, that's really what I'll tell you is I only have people on my pod that I have to be completely fascinated by their work or their life, or ideally both. And so I'm able to be super present when I talk to them, and I'm able to listen really closely.
That's
and
neat.
Yeah, it's the best, man.
Yeah, I agree. I feel that when I'm listening to the podcast, that I'm eavesdropping on two friends, talking. And, when people ask me what my podcast is, and I said, my hope is that most of the time you're going to feel like you're eavesdropping while you're standing in the queue waiting to go to a Bruce show. Like you're just hearing two fans talking.
Oh, that's great. That's perfect.
Yeah, it's everything. We're going to wrap up shortly, but I got a couple of just billions thoughts that, one, I think we all wish we had a Wendy in our lives. I just think that character is fascinating, how insightful she is, while she is a flawed character. But
they're all flawed. They're all flawed characters.
They're all gray. I mean, is that what you guys wanted to do? Is to build because you would think, oh, here's the guy from the Justice Department. He's going to wear the white hat. And here's the evil billionaire. And that is not the case whatsoever.
Well, that's just the world that we looked at. I mean, if I could bring it back to Bruce,
please.
It was more than all that put that gun in my hand. I mean,
yeah.
Or listen to Highway Patrolman.
Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, it's really wrong to let his brother drive away. On the other hand, how do you arrest your brother? So people
turn your back on your family, you're just no good, right?
Yeah, but the guy had a duty, Joe Roberts had a duty to the township also, right?
Yes.
And he really did. And and often people find themselves between two ideals. And perhaps both ideals really matter to them. And perhaps those ideals are in conflict. And that's something that I'm very compelled by.
Well, and I do think I appreciate you mentioning this, because your cast is amazing. I'm your writing team and everyone behind the scenes, give them great words and great scenes and great sets. But they execute.
Yeah, they're amazing.
They are it is just always amazing. And we love it so much. And a real good friend of mine had never watched the show, and he texted me saying, Billions is my new Suits. I just love this show so much.
I'm so glad he likes it.
Yeah, I'm so glad. I'm so happy.
I really like the guy who created Suits, Aaron. I got to spend a little bit of time with him last year and kicking his ass on the tennis court. So I felt pretty good about that. Billions over Suits on the tennis court.
Okay, there we go. Very nice. I could talk to you all night, but I want to keep this short and not overstay my welcome. As we're recording this, you have mentioned on Twitter that there's a fun cameo coming up on tonight's episode. We're recording on the 30th, so I'm looking forward to that. So,
it's already been on Twitter. I'll tell you if you want.
Please.
Well, for me, it's a great cameo because it's just, you wouldn't expect it. It's Alex Honnold, who's on Free Solo. You ever see the movie Free Solo?
Yeah.
That incredible mountain climbing. So Alex, who's the mountain climber.
How fun.
And I said, what I said was, there's a cameo in the show tonight. that if you get it, you're really gonna love it, and most people won't get it. So
That's fine.
that's what that is.
Do you get a lot of people, because you have had an amazing set of cameo people showing up for cameos? Is that just a blessing because people
Oh, it's
admire the
so
show
fun.
so much?
Oh, it's so fun. Yeah.
Yeah,
We have a lot of great ones this season too, but
well, that's
yeah,
good.
it's
That's very
it's
good.
great.
Great soundtrack. I love just all the characters. I I really can tell you, after every episode, I will go, "That's my favorite character." Oh no, that's my favorite character. And I have loved how you've been able to kind of, you don't think of it as resetting, but I do. And David Constable as Wags is just, he's amazing.
Yeah, he's the greatest, man. He was the best actor at my college. So
Yeah.
I've been an admirer of Dave Costable for a very, very long time.
Yeah, he's amazing. All right, before I let you go,
Yes,
and
Jesse.
get back to playing the guitar, Jay Armstrong is an honors English teacher in the Philadelphia area. He recently just retired, has a new book out, Bedtime Stories for the Living, but he would take 2 days and would break apart Thunder Road for his honors English seniors. They would compare it to Robert Frost. They talk about the themes Bruce explores, the allusions he has, the language, and at the end of the 2 days, he would ask the question, does Mary get in the car? Brian, that is your question. Does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
Yes, she does, because I think Bruce has answered this himself.
Okay.
Well, because I think that Tom Joad is the answer.
All right.
I think the more important question is I do think Mary gets in the car, but I don't think that the salvation offered to Mary is in the end a salvation that the character was able to offer her. And I think that look, on the Born to Run album, there's this idea that you can escape your circumstance through rock and roll, that through this kind of sacrament, like we were talking about earlier, you could will yourself out of your circumstance. But Bruce, as he matured, started to realize there were these structural problems. And that so even if you could have a week, a month, a year, look, he starts talking about it on Racing in the Streets, right? Because now my baby's eyes aren't the same as they were. Like, if we want to connect these ideas. And then when we get to Goes to Tom Joad, we get to The Highway's Alive Tonight. No one's kidding anybody about where it goes. And to me, what Bruce is saying is, we are responsible for the fact that abandon isn't enough anymore. That giving in to that kind of individual freedom, while it is important, crucial for a certain part of your interiority, the world itself has become a place that isn't empathetic enough, and the structural systems are not sturdy enough. So yeah, the highway's there, but all it can do is return you to yourself. And so to me, that's the more important way to look at it. Is that close to how I answered it? Is that close to how I answered it?
No, and actually, I like this answer better. But when your daughter asked you, you said that you like that there is no answer. You answered that you said that you like the idea that you don't know, and you think the song would be lesser if you knew whether she got in the car or not.
Oh, well, as a writer, I like that he doesn't say she got in the car.
Yeah.
But I think that, as I said, I think she gets in the car.
Yeah.
But I think the end of their thing is a lot like Racing in the Streets.
Yeah. In fact, someone once told me, when he answered the question, he said, well, of course she gets in the car, because in Racing in the Street, she talks about she sits on her daddy's porch. That's the same porch that she danced across. And I went, yeah, I can connect that. My favorite answer, I actually have a couple of favorite answers, but one of them is that Moonlight Motel is the end of their story, that they ended up getting in the car, going to California, and he's now
Yeah.
mourning Mary's death. The true geek answer is that it depends. If the band is playing it live, she absolutely gets the car. If it's Bruce solo,
Sure.
she doesn't, because it's the tone is sad. So I've
I
been
love it.
asked, yeah, I've been asked if would I quit asking the question if I ever was lucky enough to have Bruce on the show, and asked him the question, and I said no, because one of my favorite stories is Isaac Asimov in his autobiography talked about someone, a reader in an audience said that isn't what the story's about, and Isaac said, I wrote the story. What makes you think, of course it is. That's the answer. And the reader supposedly said, just because you wrote it, why do you think you know that? And
Yeah.
Asimov said, you're right. And so I think just because that's what Bruce thinks is not necessarily what we is, right? You put it out there. I may have a thought, where our characters are going to go, but we
Well,
take it
something happens in the
ourselves, right?
relationship. Yes, however lives for you
Yeah,
is completely valid for
yeah,
sure.
absolutely. Brian, anything you want to promote before I let you go?
No, man, this has been great. People can watch the shows
Okay.
and listen to the podcast and find me on Twitter at Brian Koppelman.
All right, listeners, you go get vaccinated, go get boosted. We want to get back to normal. Please be good to each other, because that's the only way we're going to do this. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, listeners, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.
Thanks, Jesse.
Doing a podcast at times can be a one-way conversation, and I hate that. So please let me know what you like and don't like about the work I'm doing. You can reach the podcast via email at setlistingbruce@gmail.com. The show is on Twitter at setlistingbruce, and my personal Twitter is at jessejacksondfw. We have a website, www.setlistingbruce.com. From there, you can find links to other Springsteen podcasts as well as other music-themed podcasts. We have a page devoted to our own SLB All-Star Band. These are guests who have been on the podcast more than 3 times. There is a link to our store where you can purchase Set Listing Bruce shirts, as well as a Mary Question t-shirt. There is a link to our Patreon page where you can sign up to help support the podcast financially. We have different levels and different rewards based on your support. If you don't have any extra cash, and right now who does, you can support the podcast by subscribing via your favorite podcast player and leaving us a review. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for people to find us. And please tell a friend about the podcast, especially if they love Bruce or music, because it will make a difference. You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.